Hi everyone, welcome back to episode 146 of The Art of Business English, where we help people like you get the language skills you need to succeed in any English speaking environment. Now, this week I'm going to be looking at how you can use the passive voice in reports to make them sound much more professional and or impersonal, so that they follow sort of the conventions of report writing. And to do that, I'm going to show you a number of things. First, I'm going to go over all of the forms of the passive voice. There are a lot, so bear with me. Pretty much the passive voice can be used in any tense in English. It's also important to note that the passive voice is commonly used in English, especially in formal written academic writing or in formal writing in business. So really important to know how to use the passive voice. And also I'm going to look at the uses, so when we use it, why we use it, etc. Okay, and then I'm going to give you some language so that you can, or some expressions that you can apply and put into your next report, especially if you have to deliver reports on a weekly basis. So let's dive in and look at this week's episode using the passive voice for report writing. So as I mentioned, we're going to be covering the passive forms. So I'll look at all the forms of the passive voice for you first. Then the use of the passive voice. And then I'm going to be looking at some report writing tips, okay, from my experience. And finally, we're going to be looking at some expressions that you can put into your reports. They are useful expressions. Some of them are passive, some of them are not, but they're all very useful. Okay, so let's start with the forms of the passive voice here today. So basically the active voice, which is what we commonly use, it shows what something does. So whereas the passive voice shows what happens to something. So the active voice shows what something does, okay, and the passive voice shows what happens to something. So the focus really in the passive voice is more on the object, whereas in the active voice, which is what we most commonly use, is more about the person doing the action. So we make the passive voice form, or with the verb to be, plus the past participle. Now the past participle is any verb from the third column. So you've got the infinitive form, the simple past, and then the past participle form. So for example, a regular verb would be walk, and in simple past it's walked, and in the past participle form it's also walked, because with regular verbs we just add ed. Whereas if you are dealing with irregular verbs, you need to memorize the list because they have different forms depending on each verb. So you've got, for example, read, which is, simple, read a book. Read is infinitive, or read in the past, and read, 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 read. So you've got read, read in the past, and read in the past participle form. So this verb's difficult too because the spelling's the same, but the pronunciation changes. So that's also something to consider. But you've also got other irregular verbs like drink, drink a glass of water. So drink, drank, drunk. Now, drunk is the third form, so that's a past participle form. So those are examples of how, the difference between regular and irregular verbs. Now, if I give you an example of the tenses now, so let's start with the present simple. So in the present simple, we would say in the passive, the union is run by 7 executive officers. Now here we're really focusing on the union and not the actual people who run it. We want to put the focus more on the union as opposed to each individual member of that union. So we say the union is run. Now is run, you can see that we've used the verb to be in the present simple form, so is, and then we've used the verb run, which is the third column past participle form of run, run, ran, run. Now, in active speech, whenever in active it would be 7 executives run the union. Okay, so here we put the focus on the executives, and that's active speech. Now, 7 executives run. So when whatever tense the active form takes, in this case, 7 executives run, that's the present simple, Then when we transform it from active to passive, you need to maintain the tense. So in this case, the verb to be maintains the tense of the active form. So we say the union is run. Okay, if it was a simple past, it would be the union was run. Okay, but let's look at the present continuous then, the next one on our list, which is the union is being run by 7 executive officers. So you can see that is being run, we've made the verb to be in a progressive or continuous form, is being, and then the verb in the passive or past participle form maintains its form, so it's run again. All right. In fact, for all the tenses, the verb will just the main verb, not the verb to be, the main verb will maintain its form. The only thing that we change in the passive is the verb to be's tense. Okay, for example, simple past, as I mentioned, would be the union was run by 7 executive officers. So in active, that would be 7 executives ran the union. Okay, so because ran is simple past, when we transform it to passive, we need to maintain the tense, and therefore the verb to be, which is essential to forming the passive, is then in the simple past. So the union was run by 7 executive officers. And the past continuous would be similar. It's the union was being run by 7 executive officers. Okay, so the present perfect is the union has been run by 7 executive officers. So it's really important that you understand how to form all the tenses in English, otherwise it's a little bit complicated or difficult to effectively use the passive. Okay, the next one is the past perfect. So that would be the union had been run by 7 executive officers. So again, we can see that we're moving through the tenses in English here, and we're using the same verb, so run, and we're only changing the form of the verb to be. So if we want to use the future tenses like going to, then we would say in the passive, the union is going to be run by 7 executive officers. And with will, we would say the union will be run by 7 executive officers. Okay. There are other forms, and I'm going to quickly explain those now, which can also be used to make things sound even more formal. So we can use the infinitive of the verb to be here. So the union is to be run by 7 executive officers. If we use this sentence, the union is to be run, it means that it's planned, it's going to happen, it's something that we've decided on, and it's going to be put into practice. Okay, so the union is to be run by 7 executive officers. That's what was agreed at the last meeting, so therefore that's what is to happen. Okay, right. You can also use ing forms. So the university insists on the union being run by 7 executive officers. This is a very nice structure and makes your writing sound very formal and very professional. Another one is used to. Now, if you know used to is when we talk about things that happened in the past but don't happen now. So the university used to be run by 7 executive officers. And modals are also commonly used with passive. Now, modals are verbs like, could, should, may, might. Okay, so in this example, I'll use should. The university should be run by 7 executive officers. And finally, need to or have to. These are also very common in the passive because we really want to make an emphasis on the fact that the thing should be finished or completed, or that there's an urgency, but we don't really say who will do the action, but we really are more focused on the outcome of the completion of that task. So the university needs to or has to be run, okay, by 7 executive officers. Often the by is not included, but I'm just using it here just to demonstrate, okay? Right. And another one here is the need plus ing form. And we're going to go into this a little bit more in the next episode next week. So the university needs running by 7 executive officers. That's also a very commonly used a structure in the passive with our writing as well, okay? So one final thing before we move on to the uses of the passive. now that we've covered all of the tenses, is we do not use the passive with intransitive verbs. So verbs which cannot have an object. So what does that mean? He arrived. Okay, he arrived. And then not he was arrived. So I hope that makes sense. Like you know, if there's no object, then you can't put he was arrived. Okay, because you know, it does in this case, verbs that don't have an object are called intransitive verbs, and with those we cannot apply a passive, but with transitive verbs, yes, you can. Okay, so he arrived, not he was arrived. Again, we can go into this in more detail. If you do have further questions regarding the passive, then please drop a comment over at the blog, and I'll be more than happy to clarify any further questions. Let's look at the passive use, and so the use of the passive, which is also important. Now, firstly, we use the passive when the object is more important than the subject, and the agent is either obvious. The agent is the thing that's, you know, acting on the object. So, if the agent is obvious to us, for example, the man was arrested. I mean, obviously we don't need to say by the police, because it's obvious that police are the ones who arrest people. So in this case, it's obvious to us that the agent is the police. If it's not important, okay, you know, the room was cleaned at 11 o'clock, it's not really important who cleaned the room, because again, it's either obvious or it's not important, because obviously the cleaner or the housekeeper cleaned the room, and, you know, I don't care who cleaned the room. What's important is that the room is clean. Or if the agent is unknown, that's also common as well. You know, the housing crisis was caused by unsafe lending practices. Okay, I don't know who specifically lent people money that caused there to be lots of bad debts. So, you know, I don't know those people, and it's not relevant to me. So we just, you know, say it was caused by this practice and not by specific people. Okay. So let me give an example, some further examples. All applications are processed on the spot. So all applications are processed on the spot. It's obvious that it is the library staff or the university staff or the government employee or the person, you know, who's responsible for processing those applications. Okay, so they are, you know, it doesn't matter who does it. What's more important is that the application is processed, and the outcome is that we either have an application granted or denied. Okay, now let's look at it. The next one, informal writing. To make it less personal, we also use the passive. So informal writing, this is what's important here. When we are writing our reports, generally they're formal documents, so we want to make them sound more professional by being less direct, so more indirect and more impersonal. For example, you are advised to return the application form within 3 days. Okay, so that's quite impersonal. No one is specifically telling you to do it, it's just that you are advised. I'm not saying I'm advising you to do it, okay? So you make it more impersonal, therefore it becomes more formal and more, you know, sounds more professional, more serious. Another example, the active voice is more direct and personal, which I just mentioned. So I advise you to return the application form within 3 days. So here it's like very personal when I use my name. I think, I agree, I advise you. Okay. We can also use the passive when we describe a process, again, because we don't really care who is doing that process. You know, it's obvious that you have to follow these steps. So an example would be the union is run by 7 executive officers who are elected by students. Now, you know, this process is, you know, that there are elections, and then the union is run. So in this case, you know, there's a clear process. Okay, we do not generally use the passive for natural or biological processes. That would be a bit weird. Where people are not involved, okay, e.g. the carbon cycle, okay, it's generally not done in that way. Normally the passive is used in, you know, processes which humans have created. Okay, let me give you one example. Plants take up carbon dioxide from the air as part of photosynthesis. Okay, I got that out. All right, and let's have a quick look. Notice how if we want to repeat the ending, this is quite interesting for our writing. If we want to repeat the ending of the previous clause or sentences at the beginning of the next sentence, let me explain that. So we can use the passive to link ideas and make our writing sound much more professional and flow together. Let me give you some examples. Now, if you're watching the YouTube channel, that's great because you can see it quite visually. If you're listening to the podcast, then maybe it would be a good idea to have a look at this information over at the blog. Okay, so I'm going to show you now. For example, does the university run the union, as a question? Now, that's a direct question, and the object at the end is the union. And then when we want to link this together, we could say, no, the union is run by 7 executive officers. So, we've clearly made this, the subject is the union, which is actually the object from the previous sentence. But we put it first to make it the most prominent thing, which the point of discussion here is the union. And then we put it into a passive by saying is run, okay? And then the last, the actual subject becomes the object here, which is the executive officers. Okay, and then the executive officers can be used in the next sentence, who are elected by students each year. So we've used the relative pronoun who plus the passive are elected. So let me just quickly run through that again. Does the university run the union? No, comma. The union is run by 7 executive officers, who are elected by students each year. So you can see how that makes our writing flow together nicely. So that's a little tip and technique that you can use to link ideas together with the passive. Okay, let me give you some more examples here. The executive officers are held accountable by the union council. So again, the union council now is the object, which we're going to turn to the next sentence. The council is also elected by the students' population. And so you can see here, I have linked the object and made it then the subject of the incoming sentence so that it flows together. Okay, so this is a very typical pattern or a very typical style in academic writing, and it's a good one to learn and focus on because it will help link together your writing in a very structured way, as well as make it sound formal and impersonal. Now, that is really some of the uses of the passive, so I hope that's clear for you. Now, final part here is I'm just going to give you some tips before I finish the episode with some expressions. So what are my tips for writing a report? Well, let's have a quick look. Firstly, you should make sure you introduce the topic clearly by providing background information and stating the aim of the report. What I mean by that is really make it clear to the reader straight away what this report is about, why it was commissioned, and what really is the purpose of the report, so that the reader knows exactly what's happening in the very first sentence or the very first paragraph. They don't need to think about it. Secondly, you should make sure that you have a very clear and descriptive title, so that it's very clear what this report is directed to, or what it's about. And you need to use subheadings, so other headings within the body of the report, because that's going to help guide the reader to the relevant information. Remember, some people don't need to read the whole report. They want to go to the part that's relevant to them, pull out that relevant information, and not waste time reading the full report. So really important, especially if you are writing reports for busy directors or managers, really make it clear so that they can extract the relevant information and not go into detail. If they want to go into more detail, obviously they can, but if you make it very easy for them to find what they need, then it's going to be a more effective report. Okay, and you should also make sure that you use a neutral or formal language or style, and that will also depend on the target reader. So Again, think about, before you start writing, you need to think about who's actually going to read it, who is it for, who will potentially be reading it. If it's going to high level people, then obviously you really need to think about the formality and the level of formality. Maybe if it's just going to your team, you could be a bit more neutral, but just keep in mind who the target reader is. That's probably one of the first things that you need to do. And make sure you use the passive voice to make the report more formal and less personal. So like I said before, avoid saying, I think this is a good idea, I recommend we do this. Okay. All right, let's finalize this episode by looking at expressions for your report. Some of these are passive, some of these are not, but they should be helpful for you. So in the opening, we can say the aim or the purpose of this report is to, and that way it's very clear what it is. The focus of this report is, so the focus, it's very clear to the reader that this report is going to focus on this specific topic. In the report, we generally need to compare and contrast, so that's interesting. There is a growing disparity between, so you can list the disparity between, whatever those two things are that you're comparing, or you could say, there is a clear distinction between, and show what this distinction is between the two things. And of course, a report needs to provide some form of recommendations to the reader, so that they, why are we writing the report in the first place? Well, it is to provide information and make recommendations about what should happen on that topic. So in light of the above, the following recommendations should be adopted. And here you can see we've used the passive. You could also say, in view of the problems outlined in this report, adopting the recommendations in this report would. So again, quite formal language. We've used a participle clause adopting the recommendations. A participle clause is when we make a verb the subject of a sentence and it is in gerund, which makes it sound very formal. So those are just a few little expressions you can use at different stages of your report. That brings me to the end of this lesson, and I hope you found it useful and relevant. Next week, I'm going to be delving into the passive voice for reporting and talking about services and things like that, which is also very common in English and very useful. So I hope you found this very useful, and if you did, share it with all your friends and family and colleagues and loved ones and second-born children, first-born children. No, I'm joking, just anyone who you think might find it useful. Well, that's it really from me this week. I hope you found this episode useful. It is December, getting towards Christmas, nice time of the year. And we're going to be linking up to some old episodes from this year, so check those out. I've got some stuff on Christmas there, and next week I'm going to be releasing the next episode for reported speech, and then the week after I'm going to give you a quick 5-minute video on some reflections from this year, from 2020, which has been a quite strange and traumatic year for most. So yeah, let's push on. 2020 is just around the corner. I hope you're all healthy and still working hard and things are going good and you've got a few plans for Christmas. So stay with me for more episodes as we bring this year to a close. I'll see you all next week on the Art of Business English. Take care. Bye for now.